customers. We actually have multiple products, but today we're going to focus on Nerdio Manager for WVD. It's really a tool for IT professionals and even service providers to use to leverage and operationalize and optimize Windows Virtual Desktop. So just a little history about Nerdio. Nerdio was founded as a company in 2005 out of Chicago. And, I want to say about 4 or 5 years ago, we started working with the Microsoft RDMI team. At the time was before WVD was called RDMI. And to date, we've pretty much deployed over, 1,000 different deployments of WVD, ranging for small business to enterprise customers up to, 1.1 million Azure AD object seats. So, we're seeing about 150 new deployments using our product every single month. So needless to say, we've seen a lot in WVD, and we sort of know all the gotchas and all the things around managing and operationalizing WVD. So I mentioned before, we actually have, now actually 3 products. We came out with 1 product last week, actually. It's the Nerdio Manager for managed service providers. So if anybody here works at a MSP or systems integrator, that product is definitely for you. But the product we're going to talk about today is called Manager for WVD. So it's the one right on all the way on the right, and it's really for enterprise customers. Nerdio is a web application that's deployed from the Azure Marketplace. It's what's known as a non-managed app, which means once you install it, Nerdio has no backdoor into your environment. It's merely just a alternative, I would say, WVD management portal that you use to manage your WVD instances. Right, it supports version 1 and version 2, and the ability to migrate from that if you wish. You could hook it into your existing environments if you already have WVD in production, or you can use it to aid you in setting up a new WVD environment in just like a couple of hours. Right, so in 2 hours you can start from nothing to a fully running host pool environment with auto scaling all set up and everything, and that's how easy the product makes. And I'll do a demo today and show and highlight just a couple of cool features and provide you information on how to get your own 30-day demo at the end of the presentation. But I won't bore you with some of the differences and features, but here they are. So what Nerdio is, it's really like I said, it's an application running on Azure's platform as a service services. It uses both Microsoft App Services and Azure SQL as the backend. And what it is it's really a website that helps you simplify and automate and scale and optimize and secure and protect your WVD environment in one single tool, right? And like I kind of explained before, it's a standalone application, so it's not multi-tenant. It's deployed into your own subscription, and again, it's known as a non-managed application, so which means Nerdio has no access. We were able to, by doing this, we were able to win customers that are in banking sectors, federal customers, PayPal. All those companies use WVD with Nerdio because they see the benefit of using Nerdio to manage their deployment. We're also deployed, and also the product itself, the licensing for Nerdio, is built through the Azure Marketplace and is part of the consumption of your Azure bill. And feel free to just unmute yourself and ask any questions if anything kind of piques and sparks your mind. So this is sort of the deployment architecture of Nerdio Manager. So forget about customer A and B. Just imagine you are customer A and a different person using Nerdio as customer B. But basically, Nerdio is the application developers. We publish the application, we throw it up into App Marketplace. You actually deploy the Nerdio application, which includes the web app, Azure SQL, App Insights, Key Vault, some automation stuff. And then what comes back to Nerdio is sort of billing information. And we basically build the Azure Marketplace. The Azure Marketplace builds your subscription, and that's kind of how the flow of the whole thing works. Okay. So these are some of the customers that are currently using Nerdio today. So I don't know what sectors you guys are all in, but hopefully there's something here for everybody, right? And these are sort of some of our global SI partners that leverage Nerdio to deploy their customers' WVD environments. Okay, so I just want to jump in and actually show you guys a quick demo. I know I only have 20, 25 minutes left, so I'm not going to waste any time, and we'll jump in. So the way you deploy it is you go to the Azure Marketplace and you search Nerdio Manager for WVD. And as long as you're global admin and ownership of your subscription, you can pretty much deploy Nerdio into its own resource group. And it's important to deploy in its own resource group. So if at any point you want to you stop using Nerdio or delete it after the trial, you can just, all you have to do is remove one resource group, and everything that's Nerdio related in there gets removed very cleanly and nicely. But once you install Nerdio, you get a custom web app URL that looks something like this. And once you go to that URL, you're going to log in using your Azure AD credentials. So it completely respects RBAC controls and Azure AD credentials and all that good stuff. And what you see here is a couple of things on the main menu. You have the ability to look at your workspaces, which is the ARM model of WVD. For those of you who still have version 1 tenants, we can still have the capability to manage all version V1 WVD. You can manage your desktop images from here. So this replaces the way that you manage images inside of the Azure the Azure portal, right? We're not using shared gallery images. We're not using any of that stuff. So if you're familiar with sort of the way Citrix works and the way Citrix and Horizon manages images, this is the same exact way we do it here. We're not going to talk really about app attach because we have a session right behind me, 1 hour on app attach, but we have the ability for you to go generate an app attach package, upload the MSIX app attach package here, and press go, and Nerdio kind of does the rest. And it packs it, it turns it into a VHD, it allows you to assign it to a host pool, it allows you to assign it to specific users and have app attach work pretty seamlessly. We have a section called scripted actions, where it's basically a library of different scripts that are very commonly used by system admins. And for example, installing Microsoft Teams with the WVD redirection, right, the WebRTC redirection. That's a really good sort of a script to have because, as you know, Teams in the general channel lets you kind of automatically update the new version of Teams when a new version of Teams comes out. But if you install it in the image inside of the WVD, you actually have to manually update that Teams every time there's a new version release. So what this is allowing you to do is after sysprep, when you deploy a new session host, you can optionally run any of these commands post sysprep. So basically you can have an image with basically a Windows 10 with nothing on it, and you can tell it to run install Teams, install Office, and it'll deploy those right after sysprep. So those things get deployed with the latest version. Same with FSLogix, right? Jen mentioned make sure you update the latest version of FSLogix. You don't have to worry about that on the image anymore. Nerdio automatically updates the latest FSLogix every time a session host gets deployed. We have a really nice monitoring, so to be able to pull metrics out of the session host to give you some insights into what's going on inside of a session host in real time. It's very nice. So I'm just going to go and poke around in the product and show you some key areas where I think those of you who are deploying WVD in production might find useful, right? So I click into the workspace, I get immediately a list of all my host pools. You can see the name of the host pool, the friendly name, the desktop experience, the stats of what's going on inside that pool, whether or not you're using auto scaling or not, and what image this pool is using, and the monthly savings, right? So why is there monthly savings? Is because one of the original features that really people purchased Nerdio for was the ability to auto scale. So we have a very robust and dynamic auto scaling engine that's able to kind of dynamically give you more session hosts as you need or take away session hosts when you don't need them. And because we're able to scale in and scale out, we're able to measure how much cost it saves you. And just based on the history of our customers, whatever you pay for Nerdio, every $1 you pay for Nerdio, you gain back about $6 or $7 in cost savings from an Azure consumption perspective. So if you think about it, Nerdio's kind of free to use because you're gaining more than what you pay for the product. But under each session host, you can kind of click the session host and look at the individual session hosts that are in that pool, right? And under the options, you have some typical options you get to adjust with the pools. You can add a session host manually if you want. But let's go back to the pool level and let's show you some of the options that you're able to manage, right? You can add users and groups very easily. You can add and attach applications. You can, add remote apps very easily. So do all that stuff. And once you add them, they just automatically appear when the customer refreshes their WVD client. But I want to spend time in the auto scaling section. That's really where, like I said, people use the product primarily for this reason. But everything else is almost like a bonus, right? So here is the settings for the particular pool. You get to basically set up what base capacity you want on the pool. So base capacity means machines sitting on standby. waiting for a trigger to turn the machine on so the machine becomes available in an instant. We ask you how many machines you want in that pool on 24/7, and how many machines you want in that pool at a maximum size. So let's say we do 50 maximum size of that pool, and the minimum is 1. And each session host we're deploying, we're going to use a D16 SV3 machine, for example, right? So what triggers the machine to add another session host to increase the capacity? You can select a couple of different algorithms, but we have CPU usage. So it says add 1 session host to the pool, right, from the golden image. If the CPU utilization across all hosts exceeds 65% over 5 minutes, and then towards the end of the day, delete 1 if the CPU usage across all session hosts drop below 40% over 15 minutes, and only scale in after 8 p.m., right? So you kind of control that scale in and scale out process. And then we can even pick aggressiveness, right? So if you're familiar with VMware and Citrix, we have the aggressiveness meter. So medium just means even though it's after 8 p.m. and the session host is supposed to scale back in, if somebody happens to be active or not disconnected in the session, we will leave them on until they log off themselves and then scale that back in. So that's one algorithm. Second one that is pretty popular is, add 1 host to the pool if the average active sessions across all hosts exceed, let's say, 16 people, right? You have a 16-core machine. Let's say I only want 1 user per CPU core. I'm going to put that at 16. So by the time it gets to 16, it's going to add another session host to that pool, increasing my capacity to another 16. Maybe at the end of the day, if the average active sessions drop below 5 across all the hosts, and after 8 p.m., I'm going to start scaling back in to reduce my cost and spend. So that's the auto scaling. There's one more algorithm, there, and we have the ability to pre-stage hosts. So let's say Monday through Friday. Let's say you expect by 7 a.m. lots of people to kind of log in at the same time. You can make it so by 7 a.m. I want all 40 machines already online and ready to accept users. That's what pre-staging of machines mean. When we scale back in, if you have this aggressiveness at high, we can send a message to somebody before the machine scales back in to give them an opportunity to log off and log back in again. And we have the ability to heal broken hosts, right? So these are some of the statuses that you can see that gets reported by the WVD agent to the WVD broker. And any of these statuses will prevent somebody from logging into the host. And if we notice these statuses, what we could do is try to reboot that machine or that session host to try to bring it back to a healthy state. Or if not, we can completely remove the machine, unjoin it from your domain, recreate it from the golden image, rejoin it to your domain, and make it available again. So this is the auto scaling engine, and the whole point of this is to really help save you money, because when you can have operate off of less hosts, you should, because of the whole cost saving nature of this. So the second thing I want to show you is desktop images. So I want to show you how easy it is to manage an image using Nerdio. So if you're using this in production already, meaning WVD in production, or using the Azure portal to do it, you'll sort of notice some sort of inefficiencies, right? You have to capture an image, manually do sysprep. Maybe sysprep breaks a couple of things, right? Shared gallery images, making sure that the images replicate across multiple regions. All those things are done very easily here. So in order to add a new image, you can bring an existing VM from Azure and capture that image. So you can go and generate a SaaS URL and generate a new Azure image from that, or you can start with an image from the Azure Marketplace. All right, so you select the image that you want to start with, and you can force it to join your Active Directory. You can also copy it to shared gallery images. You can provide a local admin for that the image itself. You can even force it to run PowerShell commands. Give you a list from the scripted action library area before this image gets sealed and sysprepped. And to edit an image, you just go to the image you want to edit, click power on. We ask you if you want to back up this image before you edit it. Press OK if you want that. Press OK. The machine turns itself on. You basically RDP into this IP address, make whatever changes you want to make, and then this button here is going to say power off and set as image. So I'm going to show you a power off as set as image task that has been completed already. All right, and if I click on the details, you'll see every single thing that Nerdio has done to sysprep, generalize, and seal this image and prep it for deployment. So without Nerdio, a lot of this stuff you'd have to kind of do pretty much manually. All right, so after this image is sealed and sysprepped, it's basically automatically shut down. Then you go back to the workspaces, and let's say you have a host pool with, let's say, 50 session hosts, and you want to re-image them. you can go to the properties and go to resize reimage, select that new host that you've just recently updated. You can batch them and do them, reimage them in groups of 10. You can schedule them to do them on a daily basis if you want at 3 a.m., right? So all you want to do is just have session hosts get reimaged every single day. And for you to need to update something, just go and update this image one time, and you can rest assured by tomorrow morning, every single user has a session host that's been updated. So I'm just kind of going through some very common workflows that are tedious tasks when you use native WVD that this product can help solve. The last thing I want to show you, I think we have, what, 5 more minutes, Jen?
Yes.
But monitoring, right? So I know Azure is coming out with Azure Monitor for WVD. I think it's in public preview right now. But for a while now, we've had the capability of pulling that data out of session hosts and displaying to you in customized workbooks that Nerdio's created. So the data gets pulled using a third-party tool called Sapago. And Sapago pulls information, dumps it into your log analytics workspace. And Nerdio's created nice dashboards to help you make use of that information. So you can say, I want to look at information pertaining this pool only and information over the last, let's say, 30 days. And it's going to, reflect the stats on here, right? So you can see active, inactive sessions over time. You can see average connect time to WVD, how many seconds it took to kind of load your WVD desktop itself on average. You can see logins per day, logouts per day, session duration, network latency. But this is the fun part. Now you can see basically a list of all your users that have logged in the last 30 days. You can see how many sessions they've had in the last 30 days. You can see the average connect time, average desktop load time, the average start time of their day, how long they've spent on the WVD desktops, average latency between their home and Azure. You can see egress data. You can see FSLogic's free space, all that stuff here, right? So let's look at, and these are real internal Nerdio users. So let's look at this guy, Ben Murrow. He's got 12 sessions. So I double click his username. It'll load his 12 separate sessions here all individually. And if I want to, look at why it took 9 seconds for him to load his desktop, I could just double click that specific session. And it'll even show you why, why it took 9 seconds for him to log on. So we know FSLogix was the culprit here. It took him 6.5 seconds to load his profile. And further down, if he has disconnects for any reason, we can drill down and look at why he got disconnected. Right. So very granular information from a monitoring and help desk perspective when you're deploying a really large WVD environment. So this is the user session dashboard. We have other dashboards. So this is now showing sessions. So now we're looking at specific pool. We're looking at data from the last 7 days. And let's say you get a call at your help desk and somebody says, my environment's running slow, and you happen to come across this workbook and you see this dashboard, you can actually highlight this area and to investigate why the CPU was spiking. And you can see Nerdio's now reloading your information from that highlighted area. You can see there's 2 individual host pools running. You can see that this host pool had these users logged in and this is what they were doing. You can even go down further and say, well, at what points was my CPU above 50%? So you can see at the time CPU was above 80% here. I could click this specific event and it'll load all the applications that were running at the time and which users were doing it. So from a troubleshooting perspective, you have all the information in its granularity to figure out exactly what you want to look for. Right. And then sort of the third and last dashboard is similar information, but focused specifically around applications. So how do you determine, which application is making your session host perform poorly? You can kind of just, again, highlight the spike. It'll load the list of applications that were running at the time and show you which users were using it. So I want to investigate Microsoft Edge, double click that, and it'll show me which users were using Microsoft Edge at that time and what they were doing with it. Right. So a lot of granular, useful information to manage WVD. So I guess to summarize, this tool is sort of a single pane of glass that you come in here and kind of do everything, your entire operationalization of WVD all in one place. So you can create Azure files here, you can copy them and configure FSLogix here. You can, we have RESTful API if you guys are using ServiceNow. We support NetApp files, multiple Active Directory forests and stuff. And this application, there's a new update that comes out every month or so. and you can just simply update the application to gain new features. So yeah, I'm going to pause here to see if anybody has any questions or about workflows or features or anything like that.
So we do have a question in the chat. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, let me pull it up.
Good. And or Andrew, if you want to come off mute and talk about it.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. It's just that I've used Foglight before. Hi, I follow Neil in the UK for the Nerdio MVP, like WVD side of things and MVP, but I've used Foglight before, so you could like replay a user experience on a web portal or a website. But for the dashboard that you've got here, could you like replay like when the user logs in the open application, so you can drill down? Like, is it like showing you in real time so that you can track?
No,
like,
so it won't show. Yeah, it can't show you. It doesn't do any screen recording or register real time, so it doesn't do that. No.
But what could it show you if it's giving you the metrics in this way? Because I'm trying to learn
Andrew,
WVD.
you're cutting in and out. I'm not sure if it's me.
Sorry. When you replay this, what can you get back from the dashboard in terms of metrics?
So this is just a dashboard showing you raw data. You can actually edit this dashboard and create your custom like views. So you can get creative and create whatever you want, as long as the tool is capturing the information that you want to see. You can display it in charts, line graphs, whatever you want. So this is just the out-of-the-box default configuration that we give you, but you can freely take this and do whatever you want with.
Cool. So question for you then, does it analyze, would it give me back when I open applications within the WVD session then?
So ask me that again.
Would it replay when like the user logging to the desktop to open the applications, or if there is a problem with a specific app, would it give me that metric, or would I have to
it won't do
go
that.
through?
You'd have to kind of dig in and look at
Okay,
that.
I could do that.
You know, it's just, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Yep. Anything else about imaging or sort of the options in the workspaces? Usually, so yeah. So I was showing you before that like in the properties of each individual pool, you can actually we have an option called VM deployment. And I was kind of speaking a little bit about it before, but some applications don't survive the sysprep process. And what you could do is actually write a script and actually have that application deployed upon the machine spitting out, right? So let's say you have a new session host created from Golden Image, and after that session host has been created, you wanted to install Teams with the latest WebRTC client, right? Or enable RDP short path as an example. You press OK, and pretty much that's it. And every single session host that gets created in that pool afterwards will have those things automatically pre-installed. So a lot of work is done for you. A lot of it is setting and forgetting, and and we have basic metrics to kind of show you how everything works and how much money you're saving over time. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint. So I've just kind of showed you guys a quick demo of it. I want to show you guys how to get it, right? So now we have something called Nerdio Manager Community Edition, meaning anybody on this call, you can actually use this in a non-production environment or lab environment for free forever. So if you have your own like WVD lab, you can install this, use it, and play around with it forever. So that's you just install it the same way. You just shoot me an email afterwards and tell me you're installing it for a lab environment, and I can make the license free forever. You get full features and full capability. This is Boss's slide. So we have a tech insider group for people who are Nerdio enthusiasts. We have a Slack channel that you can talk about anything Nerdio. Some more links and information here. So we have a knowledge base website if you want to watch videos or read about every single function. We have that. And again, how to get it is you go to the Nerdio. Go to the Azure Marketplace, search for Nerdio Manager for WVD, and pretty much install the product. And you can have a use for it for basically 30 days. And if you need more time, just let me know. Shoot me an email, and we can extend that time for you. Okay, This is my contact information, and thank you everybody for your time. And I'll actually stick around and listen to Tim's one after. Any questions?
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, there is one in the chat. You have capability of rolling out Update Manager.
You mean the Windows Update Manager? Right now we do not. So if you're using that, you'd have to enroll the VM onto Update Manager manually, but we will very soon.
Okay, there's one more. If you have 100 license, what happens when one person get into the
Good
app?
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't actually pre-buy licenses from Nerdio. You can actually freely use whatever you want. We will look at your consumption the month later and just bill you for actual usage. So it's not like Citrix where, you buy 100 licenses and the 101st person logs on and stops you from logging on. It doesn't work that way. So you could use
Excellent.
it for as many people as you want. And should we talk about pricing or yeah? So it's $4 per named user per month per WVD user, or $6 per concurrent user. So you can actually flip back and forth however you want to be billed. So let's say you have an organization of 1,000 users, but only 200 users log on at any concurrent time. We'll bill you $6 per 200 users as opposed to $4 per 1,000 user. So you can pick and choose which licensing platform or licensing format you want us to bill you by.
And can you separate out of which host pools you apply the license to?
No, it's one or the other across all of them.
Okay.
But most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, people are using concurrent user licensing, because even though you have 1,000 users in your organization, the likelihood of all 1,000 people logging at the same time, very slim. So most people would opt in to pay for the concurrent licensing model, much more than the name user model. But again, the key thing to keep in mind is every dollar you spend with Nerdio licensing, you get about $6 or $7 back in auto scaling savings.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Tony.
Awesome.
Hopefully everyone's heard that you can have a copy to play around with in your lab and send Tony an email if you're about to expire and you want to extend that. And
I'm not going to help you on board. I could help you install it. I'll help you tweak it, configure it. I can, basically hold your hands. And again, this does nothing to your production environment, meaning if you want to rip it out anytime, you can do so and nothing negative happens. So really.
Yes, I've done that a few
Try
times.
it out.
I've done that a few times in my lab. So yes, no problems there. All right, so we'll stop sharing and give Tim a moment to get set up.
Hopefully that's working for you.
Yes, I can see screen.
Terrific. Terrific. Well, thank you, Jen, for inviting me here today. I appreciate this opportunity to kind of get back in touch with this group of folks. My background, I used to be a RDP MVP with Microsoft, and I'm a Citrix CTP fellow, so I spent a lot of time with a lot of the types of people who are here on this call. But my focus has really been more off in the applications and space lately. And now that we're at a point with WVD that we got MSIX app attach finally getting to GA, it's really becoming time for me to kind of re-engage with this community. So I appreciate the opportunity. I will say I do want questions during this call. One of the criteria I've always used for who an expert is has been, the expert's the person that got on a plane and flew and is at the meeting. And it's been 1 year this week since I last got on a plane. So I think I've stopped being an expert now. So I think you folks know as much about what I'm probably going to talk about as I do. So encourage you to go ahead and ask questions as we go along through this. All right, so my name's Tim Mangan, and my company's Team Merchant Technologies. It's a small consultancy, myself and my wife. I'm up in the Boston area. This is not exactly the scene outside today, but it does look exactly like that, except that the snow isn't actually falling today. I'm mostly known for things in the realm of AppV and MSIX. We do a lot of training, which is the primary thing I do for my business. We do some consulting, we got tools, we got books. I list a couple of websites down there, my primary website, tmersion.com, but we'll be talking about MSIXconf.com, which is where I do some of the MSIX stuff as well here today. This last year has been a big transition for all of us, and for me, it was a big transition as well. We had to learn how to change what we did in terms of the training class, which was primarily an in-person event, and figure out how to do that online with folks. And that was a bit of a challenge for us this last year, but it worked out fairly well. But it also gave us time, since we weren't doing all that traveling. So last year, I wrote, along with a couple other people, Bogdan Mitrach from Advanced Installer and Kevin Kaminsky, who's my long-term companion from up in Canada in the config man and mem space these days. We wrote a book on MSIX for the IT pro. So this is a free book that you can get online. You can just go to the homepage at tmersion.com and it'll take you the link there. It's actually being hosted by the folks over at Advanced Installer. They were kind enough to put up the effort to be able to make this available to everybody for free. They don't even ask for you to register. It's really nice, the deal that we worked out. But this is a complete book covering all of the aspects of MSIX as a snapshot as of the end of last year. And so if you're someone who is looking at packaging applications in MSIX, there's a ton of information in there for you there. If you're interested in the deployment parts, there's information there. If you're worried about troubleshooting these applications, we have some things in there for you there as well. So I'd encourage you to go ahead and snag a copy of that book as you get a chance. So as Microsoft introduced MSIX, that was about almost 3 years ago now that they first introduced this to the world. They brought out 4 major points of why you would want to have MSIX. One of them is a per user installation, which isn't necessarily the first thing on all of our minds. We're very used to doing some machine level installations as well as per user installations. But it's actually not that bad to just go to a full user installation model. And I think this particular crowd, with thinking about non-persistent images and just having a base OS with as little on it as possible that makes it easy to patch and then add in all the applications afterward, I think that's something that sits well with this type of group. And MSIX works well with that as well. Now, as we take a look at something like AppV versus MSIX, one of the distinctions I try to make, and it's not a major distinction, but it's a very subtle one that ends up hitting you in all sorts of little unexpected places, is that if I describe AppV, I would say AppV is about protecting the application, and MSIX I describe as protecting the operating system. And it's a subtle difference, and both do both, but the primary impetus for MSIX is that it's a clean install and a clean uninstall, and nothing that happens while that thing is running can harm the operating system or other applications that are running on that operating system. And that's the primary focus. It also protects the application itself, but the primary focus is about protecting the operating system. And if we talk about AppV, it's really about protecting the application. It wants to integrate with the operating system, so it's not quite as focused on that aspect of it. But it does do an awful lot to protect the operating system as well, because this application is still running into some type of container. We never use that word, we call it a bubble, but it still provides some level of protection there. So it's not a complete night and day difference, but it is subtle in the way that some of the design decisions have been made and the impacts that it has as you try to take traditional applications and run them inside of these containers. Of course, the clean install is really important with MSIX. Maybe not so much for this group if you think about a non-persistent environment. You never actually do an uninstall, so you don't really care about that. But it's nice to know that it's there. And then that final point was really important to Microsoft at the beginning, which was this would allow you to distribute applications through the store. So this was part of their developer story piece of MSIX. And they thought that that was going to be really important. And over time, they found out, well, that's maybe not quite so important to everybody. And that the store is a great concept for distributing applications to the consumer, but the enterprise does not really want to go to the store at all. And so we had the store for business, and there are some folks that are using that, but by and large, enterprise IT wants to acquire the applications directly from the vendors, and Microsoft has sort of figured that out over time, and all of that method of doing things are going to become easier and have been becoming easier over time. So we're not really worried about the store, but of course the new thing that's with MSIX that really wasn't there at the beginning is this concept of MSIX app attach. So the ability to rapidly get this application onto an operating system and running, which is great for that non-persistent, or what I usually refer to as semi-persistent environment. So the multi-user scenario where the application might already be there for one user, but not this user. So when they log in, the appropriate applications get integrated in their environment. So app attach is great for all of that. And it's fantastic that it's finally getting to that state of a GA. Now, what this means for IT pros, I usually break it into a couple of categories here. There's some short-term things and long-terms here. And the long-term benefits are the ones you're really interested in and not necessarily the short-term. So at this point, you should consider MSIX to be an option in preparing the applications. All of your applications are not going to work in MSIX today. I can guarantee that right now, but some of them will. And it's an option that you should be taking advantage of and looking at, because it's not just about getting the application running in the container and using app attach as a way to bring it down. It's also about all of the other operational aspects that become involved when you start using a new way to deploy and run applications out there. So things like from your help desk, how do they detect what the problems are? How do you keep them from immediately saying, oh, that's MSIX, and bouncing the ticket over to engineering rather than try to do that first level of troubleshooting themselves? Because now they have to do that troubleshooting differently. So someone's got to figure that out, figure out how to train them, get them to do those things. And it's a good idea to do that when you only have a small number of apps and you can work out all of those processes rather than waiting a couple of years when suddenly you have lots of things coming down the pike and people are getting overwhelmed. There will be incompatibilities that happen as you try to transition apps over. You're going to learn a little bit about what those are and which ones are going to be good candidates and which ones aren't. But in the long term, there will be benefits for those few apps. And the benefits that we're looking for is really particularly when we get to the point that developers start releasing software in MSIX format. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more later on. But when they do that, the job of IT in getting the applications prepared is going to be significantly less than it is today. We won't be repackaging the applications. We'll be doing something that's really more akin to creating an MST for an MSI. So it's what are those special things that we want to do to configure this application to work in our environment? And we don't actually have to touch the vendor app itself. This just gets applied to it. And when the vendor updates their application, the thing that we applied should probably work with that newer version as well. So all we have to do is reapply it. We don't have to do any of that work again. There are also going to be much fewer cross-application issues. Now, because of the way the isolation works, apps will work together where we need to, but we're really going to have fewer issues with one app affecting another. And so we'll have fewer help desk calls. We'll get those clean uninstalls. And for those situations where we're talking about a persistent style of image, we're going to have more stable operating systems as more and more apps get pushed out in an MSIX format over the way that we do things today. Now, I do have an item on the screen here called better security, and it's one that I'm always frightened to put on the screen, quite frankly. We have to be careful about talking about MSIX as a security thing. In fact, we were always very careful about never talking about AppV as a security solution. But the reality is, as you start taking these applications and not running them natively and allowing them to just run willy-nilly all over your operating system, you put them in this container, you do improve your security posture by a little bit. It doesn't make you safe. It's just an improvement. It's harder for things to get at the application to cause problems, and it's harder for something, if it got into the application, to then spread outside of that container as well. And so MSIX is probably a little better at that than AppV was. And so I'm finally actually willing to put this on the screen, but it is part of the benefit we're going to get in the long run as we move everything into MSIX. So today, I'm happy to announce we have our new version of the MSIX report card out. So this is off of my secondary site, m6conf.com. So M, the number 6 instead of SIX, conf.com. And this was the initial site that when MSIX came out that a number of IT pros and vendors all got together, and it's a site that I run that was really a place for us to start to communicate with each other and compare notes. And we decided not to make it a forum site, which was great because Microsoft eventually opened up the tech community site for MSIX, and they've got a great forum site there. But this is a place that many of the folks that are my counterparts gather here to post information about what we see going on in MSIX. And this report card is kind of the big item that happens each year. So this is a set of work that I do and write a state of where we are in MSIX once a year, usually released around the end of January. And today is the date for that. And I'm happy to have the ability to talk about what's in this year's report card at this site. So this is something you can go ahead and download from m6conf.com. I'm actually going to put a link here in the chat. Meant to do that.
I did.
Great. All right. Well, I just put another one. But that's something you can download and you see this data where we are. And I'll talk a bit about that here, as well as some other things associated with where I think we are in MSIX. So the things that we try to cover in terms of that report card, we try to answer a lot of these questions, because MSIX is a story about the software vendors. There's a huge story here about AppCompat, and we do a lot of testing that we show the results of in this report every year, and that's the big thing that folks are looking at. We also take a look at all the vendor tooling that's out there. We talk about in the past, will app attach work, and now we spend a little bit of time talking about the integration now that it's really available. So I did not run a survey this year. Last year, I ran a survey associated with the report card. And we did actually 2 surveys, one for developers and one for IT pros, as a way to figure out kind of where their heads are in terms of MSIX. I chose not to run the survey again this year, and that's because I felt that where we were in the rest of the report card indicated to me that I wasn't going to see terribly different results this year if I reran the survey. I think I'd get very much the same kind of answers. So we're holding that back, and I'll probably do it again next year. But I do want to share a couple of things from the survey in the past, because I really think they still apply. One of the things I like to talk about is when we talk about, are software vendors going to follow this? And are they all going to come to MSIX? Because that's what Microsoft would like to have happen. They want the MSI to go away. They want everything to move over into MSIX. Microsoft makes these statements about how many applications are out there, and there are just so many applications out in the environment, and particularly with the larger enterprises, which tend to be our kind of customers, they have a lot of older applications in there as well. So I did ask a couple of questions of the developers themselves about what their plans are and what are they looking at. Now, I don't have a great developer following. I have a much greater IT pro following, so we didn't get a ton of answers in there. And the ones that we got were people who were actively looking at MSIX. That's why they answered the survey. So they were, very positive a year ago when they answered this. We asked, are you having plans to release something in MSIX format in the next year? And 2/3 of them said yes. When we asked them how many apps they thought they released, it would be a bunch of them, between 10 and 50 applications out there. And, as I looked at those numbers initially, I said, well, that's just not realistic. That's not going to happen. These are the people who are enthusiasts. They haven't gotten far enough along in the process, and they probably haven't seen the kind of problems they're going to have. I really doubt that those numbers are going to hold. Now, what's out there? Well, we don't really have great numbers for that. Microsoft kind of intentionally hides in the Microsoft Store whether apps are UWP or MSIX oriented. So we really can't tell unless you acquire every one of those applications, download it, and then open it up to take a look. We can make some assumptions, though, based on what I see there, and that I think there's probably very, very little MSIX up there. I can recognize about a handful of applications that I can recognize are going to be MSIX by scanning through that catalog. I suspect there are some games that are MSIX in there that I just can't recognize. I'd have to actually go buy the game and download it and break it open to figure that out, because of other chats that I have with developers. I know that some of that activity is going on. So there are some games there, but from an enterprise app perspective, there's really only a handful of apps that are up there in the store. And of course, the other place that you would acquire apps would be directly from the vendors. And I really haven't seen any evidence of vendors going out there and saying, hey, we now have it for you in MSIX format. There are a few that are out there. For example, if you went to the site for Blender, they have an MSI installer, which is the first thing you go see when you go to their site to download the software. But if you dig under the covers, about 4 links in, you can actually find they have an MSIX version there. But they're not making a big deal of it. And quite frankly, having used the MSIX version, I can tell you we're not getting the full fidelity of that application yet. And that's why that they're not really promoting it at this point. But yeah, there are folks out there that are working on it. But this is an area that Microsoft has a lot of work to do to get the developers on board, because that's the goal here. If the developers never deliver an MSIX format, MSIX will turn out to be a technology like click to run, and it will just wither away, and we'll be doing something different in a few years. So what did Microsoft do this last year to try to provide a carrot to get the developers on board? And this is kind of the way that I describe that to folks that aren't developers, which is that developers in the past have had to run on these vertical stacks. So they would write their application in some unmanaged C++ code using a thing that I'll incorrectly call WinForms, but let's say it's WinForms. So it has a way of describing what the user interface should look like, that has dialog buttons and fields. It's all of those older apps that you're used to seeing that are Win32 apps. And it would use this unmanaged Windows API, which has been around forever, to be able to get the job done. Or the developer could build themselves in the .NET framework way. So here they would be using XAML for the user interface. They'd use WPF and create this .NET-based application. And they'd build all of their code through that fashion. Now, Microsoft did make available the ability to call some of the older unmanaged code from the API perspective, particularly a lot of the old COM stuff that they didn't want to rewrite into .NET. So there were some linkages there to allow them to use things, but primarily the developer was focused on just one of those 2 stacks. Then Microsoft created this third stack called UWP, or Windows Universal Apps, which is the original name of that stack. And in that stack, they would again write their user interface in XAML, but it was a different form of XAML. And it would use a different version of the .NET framework, which is a very skinny down version because of what Microsoft's goals were with that stack. And their goals were really around the concept of that Windows phone that they were also trying to use at that point. So the idea was that if you wrote your programs in this area, we were going to allow you to take your application and run it everywhere. So it will run on a Windows desktop. It'll run on a tablet device. It will run on your Windows phone. We'll have versions of .NET Core that run on iOS and on Android. So you can write your app once and it'll work in all of these different places. It's almost a take on the old Java write once, run everywhere thing, right? That didn't really work out because Java didn't quite do it right. So this was their attempt at doing that. And of course, the Windows Phone has gone away. But what happened with this is that these applications had to run inside this very tight container with a very small API. And the applications really weren't able to do a whole lot. It was fine for a game, which is what they were primarily thinking about at that point. They wanted to win back the developers that were developing their games for iOS first and then maybe porting to Windows. And they wanted them to just write them once and have them on the Windows platform as well. So for a game, that's fine. It's a self-contained thing. But for an application, like an enterprise application that wants to integrate with other applications and integrate with the operating system, those capabilities just weren't really included. And so we never really saw anything but very small apps or games or apps that were really a front end to the real app being up on a web service somewhere or up in the cloud. Those were the types of things that worked well under UWP, but anything that we'd consider to be a real enterprise scale application just couldn't be built in that format. And Microsoft quickly learned that that just wasn't going to happen. So what they're doing this year to provide a carrot is they're saying, look, we're going to break things up. We're going to split up the user interface from the API code on all of these stacks. And we're going to allow you in the future to mix and match in your development. So you can use features like XAML islands as a way to have a UI that's pretty much one way, but then use a portion of the user interface from one of these other stacks. And similarly, you'd be able to call between the different API stacks as well, as long as you are on a Windows platform and running inside of MSIX. So that's what that carrot for MSIX comes into play. They're also telling developers that all future work that Microsoft does is really going to be on that stuff on the right-hand side. So you don't have to build your app. If we do this, you don't have to build your app as a Windows Universal app. You can build it starting out as one of these other pieces, but still leverage those components from the other stack. And this is the carrot that they're making. They're trying to get all of the developers to get into the MSIX form. Will this be successful? Well, we're going to have to wait and see. But it is a much better carrot than what they had before, which was the carrot was, this will allow you to get into the Windows Store, right? That one didn't work. We'll see how this one goes. Of course, the big question that most developers have on their mind is, where is Microsoft with MSIX? Now, I can tell you from the looking that I've done, Microsoft has done a pretty good job of integrating MSIX into your Windows operating system that you're running today. When I looked at the operating system a year ago and I looked for how many MSIX apps come with the OS or shortly after you've gotten into the OS with the regional apps that get put into place, it was a very small number. It was under 10. As I look at it this year, it's actually becoming a little hard to tell what's UWP and what's MSIX because they're all kind of getting closer to the same. But the number is probably more like 70. So there's a lot more built into the OS over time. So Microsoft is making the move, but Office is the big question. That's the platform, and that'll signal developers that say that Microsoft is truly very serious about this. So where is Microsoft with Office? Well, as a Microsoft MVP, I'm often exposed to NDA information that prevents me from talking about a topic like this, but I've been very, very careful to actually actively avoid the Office team at Microsoft, so I don't have any inside information I can possibly spew, and I can just tell you what's on my mind and what I think as someone who's been involved with this type of stuff in the past. And what I think is that Microsoft is very interested in getting Office out there, but it's a lot of work. You take a look at how hard it was for Microsoft to get Office to run inside of AppV. You know, they actually hired away a guy from the AppV team, who is one of the great guys I had originally hired. And he worked on the Office team. And he worked on the Office team for about a couple of years before we got the first version of the Office Deployment Toolkit that could produce an AppV package out of Office. And even at that point, it still took a couple more years before it was really in a state that we were ready to recommend to customers that this is an okay way to deploy Office in AppV. Prior to that, there were just too many problems. And even then, I'd say it was probably a third year before anyone who was using SharePoint should even consider using that version of Office. So because Office is a platform, it just integrates with everything. It's got all of these different pieces that are built and built by different groups within Microsoft, very separate groups from each other. Even though it delivers a platform, it's really a set of products. Even if you look at something like when the ribbon came into Office, the ribbon came into the different pieces of Office, and like Outlook was one of the last ones to get it because that team was so busy with so many other things. And I think what we'll probably end up finding with Office and MSIX is that we'll start seeing pieces of Office come out in MSIX, but not the entire platform all at once. That would be my guess. One of the other things that we need for Office to actually be able to work at all is the idea of the equivalent of the connection group that we had in AppV. So Microsoft has been talking about this to us for quite some time. They have, just get rid of that. They've been talking to us about for some time. They've used a variety of different names on it. I don't know what the final name is going to end up being, but we really haven't seen the detail about what it is yet. So given the way that this is something which is part of the OS itself, the earliest we would see the first sign of that would then be this spring's release of the OS. We'll have to wait and see. I'm hoping that we see some stuff in there. I really, at this point, have no idea if we're going to see that in there. But that's got a major requirement to be able to get this work. We have to have separate components that are MSIX and have the ability to run them together in one container. And that's what this grouping function is about. So as Office starts to become available, I think that's the thing that'll finally really trigger the developers to move forward with MSIX. I will say that I am seeing many more questions in the forums from developers. So they are clearly busy kicking the tires to determine whether or not they're ready to try to move that direction now. I'm starting to see a little bit more interest due to the carrot piece, but whether or not that's truly going to turn into them deploying applications, I think this is the item that'll really trigger that the most. So we have some time ahead of us before we'll know the answer to that. The other question that I had, a survey that I had, of course, was to the IT pros. And this is just give you an idea of the types of folks that we were talking about. So we were talking about people with lots and lots of applications. So these were the larger enterprises. And in fact, anytime I look at this chart, I always think that this number is also, this chart is wrong. Anytime I go into an IT enterprise and we want to do some big migration project, the first question I ask them is, how many applications do you have? The next thing we do is we go out and we actually survey and find out how many applications they have. Whatever number they give us is always about 20 to 50% low. So there's always more applications out there than they're really thinking about. But the number that we got from the survey that I did like, that I hadn't really ever been able to try to quantify, was this question here. When we asked them about their update policy with applications. So how often do you really update these applications and do set out? And you can see, the numbers here we're showing like averaging around 25% of the apps get updated over the course of a year. So if you look at that, you say, okay, so over about a 5-year period, you should get most of them out there. And again, I think the number here is a little bit skewed. As I go into an enterprise, I know that typically about 10% of their applications have installers that are at least 10 years old. So they're not really updating at this rate. But these are the applications that are front of mind, right? Those older applications, they've been installed, they work great. They really don't think about them and they fall off of their radar. So they don't include them in a number like this. So, there is this longer tail of applications that we see, particularly in the larger enterprises that are out there. But my sense of things is that over time, enterprises are doing a better job at updating the applications than they have in the past. They are trying to keep up with this more. And a lot of that is just the security aspects associated with it, that they have to stay on top of it because you don't want to breach because you had that old version of an application. So this is an area where things have been getting better. So onto the report card. There is actually a report card, believe it or not. This is the card itself. So we kind of track it against what you used to get in grade school. And we have a number of categories that we go through. And then, most of it's like a 22-page paper. So we've got a lot of detail as we go into each of these subjects. But this is just sort of a fun way to put that together at the top. So one thing I haven't talked about before I get into the report card, I have to really talk about is how MSIX is actually operating here. Because Microsoft made some choices as they built this technology. And they made some choices that were different than with AppV. With AppV, as we put the application into that kind of environment, AppV includes a lot of remediation for older application code built into the framework itself. And so as you run that application, if that application wants to do things like write a configuration file in the program directory, something that's just bad, you shouldn't be doing in a modern application on Windows 10, that used to be the standard many years ago. And so if you have that application, AppV would just immediately recognize that. You just have to package it up and it will take care of that for you. You don't have to do anything to make that work. Well, under MSIX, Microsoft took a different approach. And they said the container is a container. But what we're going to do is we're going to provide this capability that you can add in called the package support framework. And the package support framework is a set of code is built on detours, which is the same technology used in AppV or UEV, or even some of the third-party vendor UEM products licensed a copy of detours in the past. But now this is all open source stuff that's out there. And you can build a set of intercepts that will intercept the application calling into the Windows API to make changes to make the app work properly when you're running inside this environment. And they created the first set of fixes in there, and then they really left it to the community to build the rest of the kind of support that we need in the PSF to be able to get applications to work. And so that's been a major part of what I've been involved with, is contributing into the PSF to provide us better fixes and more types of fixes so that we can get a better sense, a better level of application compatibility. Now, what actually needs the PSF? So as we look at the applications, initially, and this has changed. This is from a couple of years ago, so it's changed a little bit as Microsoft has added more support in the platform. But when I looked at my first set of apps, I found about 20% didn't need the PSF, and another 80% needed something to be able to run. And of those, about half of that remaining 80%, we could see something in the app as we tested it that we could fix with the package support framework. And the other half of that, we really couldn't. Now, of that stuff that's in that identified need category, just because we add the PSF in doesn't mean that that app would now work, because typically we found that these apps had additional problems, and many of those were in the no fix available category yet. But at least gave us hope that, yes, we could move these applications forward. So the kind of problems that we run into is we try to take these applications and run them in a container. There's a whole bunch of things all around the shortcut itself, because we don't actually put out shortcuts the same way. These go into the manifest, and the manifest has to deploy those for us as we install the application. And Microsoft doesn't do things the same way with these. And there are restrictions, because it was really built around the needs of UWP, and we're having to augment that with the package support framework. But we can solve all of those types of problems very easily these days with the PSF. We also had problems with the application finding files. So if the application package included files in places like the user's app data local or roaming folder, if those are in the package as a way to configure the application out of the box, the application couldn't actually see those files unless we bring in a PSF component called the file redirection fixup. Similarly, if the application wanted to write into any files, we don't have the copy on write technology that we have in AppV out of the box. So the file redirection fixup can do that type of copy so that we're allowed to write to those files. Initially, we couldn't write to the registry at all. And now, as of the 2004 OS, but not running these apps on a previous one, so there was an OS restriction there. But as we get to the 2004 OS and later, we now have the ability to have the application write to HKey current user. Still can't write to HKey local machine, but we get current user. For most applications, there are some ways that applications could try to work with the registry that still don't work in HKCU. And I created a new fix-up to help solve those problems this year. So we can now hit most all of the apps in terms of working with the current user hive. There's a ton of problems associated with the shell API. So whether we're talking about shell commands or shell extensions and various other types of shell integrations that aren't the app itself, but are these pieces to allow you to access the app while you are sitting in a Windows Explorer. Those pieces are very problematic, some of which we can fix up today, many of which we're still looking for how we're going to fix them in the future. And then fonts also came into play with the 2004 OS. If the package had fonts in them, they didn't work at all. We now can find them. And then lastly, finding the DLLs becomes a problem due to a number of different issues. And I created a new fix-up this year to help take care of those things. But those are the primary things that we've been finding in working with the applications. There is probably a missing category here, which is we don't know why it doesn't work. And that's out there. And we'll continue to work on these things going forward. So how do we do packaging with MSIX and with the package support framework? You have some choices. You can go with the Microsoft tooling method. So they have a thing called the Microsoft packaging tool, which is a capture piece not too unlike the AppV sequencer. So those of you who are familiar with that. But again, that tool doesn't know anything about the package support framework, and Microsoft has decided not to build it into it. So I created a different tool called PSF tooling that you use it in conjunction with the MSIX packaging tool. So this is a free community tool that you get it really at the same place you get the packaging tool. They're both up on the Windows Store. You can download them for free. And you use these two pieces in conjunction to be able to create the package. So you use the packaging tool, you go through your basic wizards, you get into an installation mode, you install, you configure the application, and then before you finish monitoring, you run this thing called PSF tooling. And PSF tooling will look at what the application installed, figure out most of the cases where you need PSF components, and pre-configure that stuff for you. Now, there are some things that it can't detect. There are some things like if it wanted to actually write to the registry in a way that wasn't going to be allowed without this new fix-up, there's no way for PSF tooling to detect that. So you'd actually have to detect that through testing your package and then come back and add those pieces in. But as you do that, it'll fix up the application for you, and then the packaging tool will finish off that process and create your MSIX package. And this is sort of the state of the art if you're using the Microsoft tooling as a way to do this. Third-party tool vendors that have packaging products. So these would be people like Flexera with Admin Studio, Advanced Installer, and there's just a whole host of those folks out there. They traditionally have done MSI repackaging. They've also, over the years, added AppV packaging to their products, and they've all added MSIX packaging as well. And those folks, by and large, include the PSF directly in their product, and that's also an option as a way to create these packages. The types of fix-ups that we have available that are part of the package support framework, we have a piece called the launcher, and the launcher is really a requirement if you're going to use the PSF. And you can think of this very much like the old SoftGrid system, where when you packaged up, all the shortcuts pointed to a thing called SFT Launcher, and SFT Launcher then launch your application. And that's what we're doing here in this case as well. So we're injecting this launcher into our product, we're configuring it so that all the external ways that you start this application up, whether it be from start menus or file associations or protocol handlers, they'll all go through this launcher, which gives us the ability to bring these other fix-ups, which are DLLs that get injected into the process, and then they can do their thing. So the fix-ups that we have are the file redirection fix-up, which takes care of a lot of the problems of just finding files and writing to files that are part of your package. The dynamic library fix-up, that's a new one that I added to help the application find its DLLs when they can't get found. The reg legacy fix-up fixes up some weird ways that applications used to work with the registry that work fine natively. They work fine under AppV, but they just don't work under MSIX, even on the new version of the OS. And we can intercept and remediate those and get them to work with what MSIX is going to allow them to do. The environment variable fix-up is a new one they also added this summer that gives us support for environment variables in your package and making them become virtualized within the package container as well. We also do have package scripts. I kind of skipped over that, and I really should talk about that because this is a big item for most folks as they first start looking at creating an MSIX package. We're very used to having an installer be able to do customization as part of that installation. So it has the ability to look at who the user is or other things and do optional things as part of that install. And whether that was custom actions in an MSI or part of package scripts that you use as part of that installation, this has always been a big part of how IT deploys applications. And under MSIX, we do not have an install script capability in any fashion. When that thing installs, you get the package and that's it. So we do have this concept, though, of the launcher supporting package scripts. And one of the things we'll do with the package script is then we will have a first run script that runs. And that's really where we migrate those types of activities to. We put them in these package scripts. But we're really not going to be able to do everything we used to want to do in terms of install scripts because the end user is running in standard user mode. So you're not going to have package scripts here that install a dependency. We're going to do those things different ways. But for basic configuration of the app, yeah, those are the types of things that we can do in these scripts just fine.
So Tim, we had a question in the chat.
Great. Does the dynamic library can be used by default without issues, or you only use it when used? Okay. So the question is about the dynamic library fix-up, and the question is, can it be used by default, right? And it won't break anything. Can we always just stick it in there? Or is it potentially a problem and we should only use it where we need to? A dynamic library fix-up is one that is completely safe. I would say you can put it in every single package as long as you're using the PSF. Just drop it in there. It will not cause any harm. It just is a intercept that'll happen when the application asks for a DLL. As we use PSF tooling, it will actually find all of the DLLs in your package and will configure them in so that that DLL name gets asked for. It will get pulled from your package before it looks at any other source. And pretty much that's a solution you need for any application. And if you don't need that because the app would have found the DLL, it causes no harm. If anything, it might just speed up the application because it'll find the DLL straight out. It'll look right to the location it's at. So yeah, that's a fix-up you can always include. I also feel pretty much the same way with the file redirection fix-up, although the file redirection fix-up does cause some additional overhead because it's doing copy on access rather than copy on write. But if you were always to include the file redirection fix-up, the dynamic library fix-up, and the environment variable fix-up in all of the packages that you bring the PSF in, those are things that really aren't going to cause any harm. And I feel safe in doing so. Hopefully I answered Raul's question there. Okay, so as we talk about the compatibility level of applications, I like to introduce a term called application fidelity, which is really my way of describing when is an app compatible and when isn't it, right? And I use a very, very tight criteria for this. So if you ask me if a particular MSIX package is good or not, and you ask somebody else, we will often get different answers based on what's important to them. And my definition with application fidelity is a very strict answer. It fits the criteria of probably the most picky customer that's out there. And it's as simple as this. If you have the MSI version of that application installed, and I give you an MSIX package with it, and you test it out, does it have everything that the MSI version had? Would you be willing to replace it with that? Or are you losing something in the process? And so the testing that I do goes against that style of criteria. And I recognize as part of it that different companies are going to have different answers as whether or not that app is good enough in MSIX. And so in the testing, you'll see we have some categorization to kind of help clarify that. And you know, I end up through this report producing the numbers that say we get this % of applications as being compatible in MSIX. And that's sort of my base number for the pickiest customer that's out there. You know, that's for the customer that still has applications that talk to mainframes, that has change control boards that we meet weekly, simply for the purpose of saying no to pretty much everything anyone ever wants to do in the company. Those companies are the ones that are at that level. As we look at some of the other categories, we get an answer of how much compatibility there is that's probably closer to what Microsoft gives as numbers, right? They're not so interested in having every little thing working in that application, but as long as the base functionality that they need works, they're happy to go with it. Right? So this is the criteria I set up in my testing for that. So that full fidelity answer is the things that show up in the bucket at the bottom there where I say success. And that really is that idea that everything that app allows an end user to use is completely there. And there is no degradation in the fidelity of that application. The next category above that says that, you know, the major features are all there, but there are some little things that might or might not be important to your organization. So an example of that might be an application like 7-Zip. So 7-Zip has a shell context menu that we don't get in MSIX. And so for many people, they just go to the start menu, they run the app, they get the full feature of everything they need with that application under MSIX. But for a lot of users, they're really used to just right-clicking on a file and seeing a menu show up that says, send this into a 7-Zip package. That doesn't appear currently with that particular product. So some customers are going to look at that app and say, yeah, that one's good. Others, not so much. Things that I put in the blue category there are ones that enterprises are more likely to say that this is okay, but not necessarily all customers would. As we get into the yellow category, we sort of flip that around. These are minor features or pieces of the application, if you like, that most customers will probably say that's enough for me to reject the MSIX package. But there are some customers that will go ahead with it anyway. They don't care about that particular feature, or this is only one place the user does that work. And if they really need those other pieces, they'll stay on their standard desktop rather than go into, say, a WVD session. And then everything above that is just failed. Okay, I do see a question here, so I'm going to pause here and take a look at that. It's a follow-up question here. Will your tool give any warnings telling fixes will work only on XXX version, like 1909, 2004, for example? The answer, so you're asking about the tool PSF tooling and the work that it's doing there. No, I really don't do that at this point. You're gonna need to know a bit about the application and a bit about MSIX to be able to do that. As much as possible, I try to make the tool work as it's possible on any version of the OS that you're going to run that application on. But clearly, there are things like the registry piece I just can't do anything with unless you're on 2004. And of course, you're packaging on a different machine, so I can't necessarily know what OS you're going to be on. So no, I am not at this point. I do love the idea. Some of the work that I'm doing here this next year will probably start to incorporate some of those types of ideas. So thank you for the thought. All right, so let's get into some of the test results. And so each year I add more applications into the mix so that we keep a few fresh ones in here. We're not always looking at the same apps. This year I'm up to 70 apps in my test bed. I start with taking these applications and testing them in Microsoft AppV, and I use that as my benchmark. So the set of applications that I have here, you can see a very high number of applications. Most of these are applications I've gathered from enterprises I've worked with. There are a few specialty apps that I have in here that are designed to look at one particular aspect of the Windows API or integrations, just to be sure that we totally understand whether or not that particular thing works. But by and large, these are mostly enterprise applications. Now, not in the mix here are a whole slew of applications that just don't work with AppV, and by the way, will not work with MSIX. So these are apps that would have drivers in them, let's say, and things like that. But I've also excluded things that will work in AppV but won't work in MSIX, and that would be including things like Java web apps, anything that plugs into Internet Explorer. We just can't do that with MSIX, and we never will be able to. So I just keep those out of the mix altogether. So, my numbers here, of course, I'm also very good at AppV packaging, so my numbers are very high. Your numbers on these same apps in your organization probably wouldn't be as high as this. You might not drive that level of compatibility quite as much because you always have options on how to deploy things, and it's not worth your time to get to that level. But if you think your normal number is, 80%, that's fine. You can just use that as a translation to the numbers in the rest of the testing. But this is the base set that I do as my benchmark here. So as you can see, we get very good compatibility across the board with AppV. This is a look at those same 70 apps packaged using the Microsoft packaging tool without the package support framework. So this is what Microsoft themselves is providing. The first year I ran this test, that's where I had that 20% number. Last year for that green category there of success. Last year, that number went from 20 to 25%. This year, it went up to 31%. So that's reflective of the things they've been adding into the operating system. So these numbers clearly do depend on you being on 20H2 is the OS version I tested on, although I am extremely confident these numbers would be identical on the 2004 OS. So the changes that go into the platform for MSIX have a tendency to come in that spring release, and we really don't see much happen in the fall release. That's been the trend so far. Obviously, Microsoft can do things differently in the future, but that's what we're seeing at this point. So I would consider that 31% a good solid number for 2004 and above OS, and it would probably stay at that 25% number if you were still running on an older operating system. But as we bring in those other categories, if you ask Microsoft what their number is, they would probably give you a 60% number in terms of application compatibility for MSIX. And that's really because they're including both those blue and yellow categories where not necessarily all the features are there, but it's good enough from their perspective. And quite frankly, I think it's more of a question of Microsoft not really understanding what level of testing and test criteria that enterprises use as they want to deploy applications. So I think my numbers are probably a little closer to reality than the numbers we get out of Microsoft. But there's a lot of judgment that's involved in this stuff. So as we bring in the package support framework, so this is using PSF tooling 3.8, which is the newest version that came out about a week ago. The number goes up considerably. I was really expecting that we would have hit the 60% mark on this test this year. I do a lot of preliminary testing in the summer, and everything I was seeing there looked like we would probably hit that number of at least 60% by the end of the year. But we had some things that happened in here. In particular, if I go back to the previous slide here, this 5.7% black mark here, those are applications that I could not package. Now, when I was looking at this over the course of the summer, there weren't any applications in that black box. Everything packaged up fine. So we had some bugs that came into the Microsoft packaging tool, which are now causing us some problems. So that's a temporary thing. It'll go away. The package support framework actually avoided many of those problems. So we only had one application that I still couldn't package up after I brought in the package support framework. But I expected to get a little further along. I was hoping to hit that 60% number, and we almost got there. So we're pretty close. But if you look at the higher level of criteria there, we're still just under 75% when we bring in the blue and yellow categories there of partial feature supports. So, this is looking a lot better. In fact, this year, now that we have 3 years under our belt, I was able to build a trend chart to show you how this has worked over the last 3 years. So as we first started out 2 years ago, we were at a 20% mark, and we really didn't have a PSF we could work with. The PSF existed in source code form only. There was really no way for an IT pro to use the package support framework unless they wanted to go to GitHub, download the C code, C++ code, and pull out Visual Studio and build their own copy and manually copy things in. So we really were kind of stuck at that level. Last year, the platform improved a little bit, and we were starting to use the PSF. So we were doing some things here. This year, we got about that 5% improvement in terms of what Microsoft was doing themselves. But I've done a lot of work to improve the PSF to help bring this number up so that we're getting to almost at that 60% mark. So let's talk a little bit about MSIX App Attach, which is now finally in GA. So that's the new great way to quickly bring applications in. It's built by folks, I say here, that think app layering is cool. So they're using a lot of the same techniques that folks in app layering use. And that has influenced the way that they've put this together. It is for that non-persistent, what I refer to as semi-persistent situation. So semi-persistent would be like the multi-user operating system where the app might or might not be there because an earlier person was there. You just need to do the integration pieces in there. But it's really for that type of environment, and you're sitting there inside, running the load inside a data center of some type. Now, when Microsoft talks about App Attach, what I find is they have a tendency to talk about it in terms of the WVD product. And App Attach is really two different pieces. There's kind of a lower level piece that can be used in a variety of different locations and ways. And then there is the full level of integration of MSIX App Attach, which includes all of the integration for WVD and into Azure and just making this whole seamless experience work. So anyone who's played around with MSI App Attach prior to the real release software kind of getting together was really using the lower half of that, where we're doing a bunch of stuff and changing out the file formats and running PowerShell to be able to bring these pieces in. Other vendors that aren't going to be deploying through WVD but want to provide the same kind of server-based computing, VDI, DAS type of solutions, they're going to be using the lower portions of App Attach with their own management software on top of it as well. So we do have these two halves that are there. And I've been primarily focusing on the lower half of that support so far. So this is things that would be used in different places. And some of the vendors, like I know VMware has been very public about supporting app attach. Citrix, I think we all know, is going to, although they haven't quite have been quite as vocal about that as well. It's great that it's no longer in tech preview in terms of the WVD implementation. You should be looking forward to starting to use that a little bit as well. Of course, you're not going to get, as I said, you're not going to get everything working in MSIX right now. So in addition to deploying MSIX through this method, and this would be the method I would certainly recommend that you do in a WVD scenario, you're probably still going to end up having to think about, either getting some things in the image, and nobody really wants to do that, or continuing to use AppV, which continues to be a very good technology, and it works well in the WVD space as well. You might need a little bit of work if you aren't going to be in a hybrid like a scenario, so you don't have AD available, then it becomes a little more problematic. But even there, we have ways of dealing with that today. So when we look at the lower portions of the app attach, what do? We take the MSIX package, which is basically a fancy zip file, decompress it, and throw it into a VHD, which is not compressed. And then we use the normal mounting process. So as user logs in, we mount the appropriate VHDs in, and we use some special interfaces for the package manager to be able to get that integrated into the user. So I did do some performance testing, and before I throw up the chart, I'm going to let you know that that testing is on a very old pre-release version of app attach, and things have probably improved a little bit. One of the things that we've also heard about, and I haven't really played with yet, is this SIMFS. So the idea here is that when you attach a VHD, you're really attaching for read-write purposes to that VHD. And they'd like to have something that acts more like an ISO, where it's read-only, because that's all you really need. And so SIMFS is going to become the replacement, we believe, for the VHD, and SIMFS is sort of that newer version of an ISO-like format that we can mount for read-only purposes, with the idea that this is going to improve performance. Now, the test that I'm going to show, I really don't expect SIMFS to have a big impact on the performance, because the tests that I ran were really a single user test. What does it take to get these applications up and running after the user logs in? SIMFS is more likely to help the scalability type of test, where we have thousands of users with hundreds of applications all trying to use them at the same time. That's where I think SIMFS is going to provide that level of performance, but we'll have to wait and see and learn more over time with that.
Tim,
all right.
Yes. There's a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to address it now.
Okay. Raul again. From what I know, the installer of MSIX installs the service externally, locally. So app attach will not have, I can't see the end of that question. There it is. Will not have it because it's just a mount of VHD. Okay, so let's talk about services in MSIX. So number one, services.
I think Raul was trying to answer Tom's question, which is right above his.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the answer. Are there any limitation differences between MSIX and app attach? For example, I heard that services in app attach is not supported the same way it is for MSIX in general. Okay, so services were added into MSIX just within this last year. So you have to be on the 2004 or above OS to get them, but this crowd, that shouldn't be a problem. The services are not done in MSIX the same way they were done in AppV. In AppV, it was totally virtualized and it was part of your container, and there were few problems with services. There were a few with AppV, but there were very few problems with services under AppV. MSIX, they took a different approach, and as you add the MSIX package, there is actually an installation that occurs of the service directly into the operating system, while the rest of the application is inside the container. We know of some issues we're starting to see with those services. I suspect we're going to learn about more service issues as we just get more experience with it. You know, because of the apps that we're dealing with, we're tending to deal with applications right now to get that level of compatibility that aren't using services, or if they're using a service, it's for an auto updater and we're turning that off anyway. So we're not having those types of problems. There are apps that may have something like the FlexNet licensing, and that involves a service. That itself seems to be okay. Now, specifically, as we talk about MSIX app attach, initially I was very worried about the services and how app attach would be able to handle those. And the initial reaction I got of the Microsoft folks was that app attach just can't deal with services right now. I think that has changed a little bit, but there are some problems. We've seen issues on a multi-user operating system with services that concern me right now. So where you have one user get the application and now another user tries to get that application, or maybe a different version of the application because that's what's published to them. And doing that on the same machine is causing some issues. And I think they're just issues, and Microsoft has to figure these things out. I have seen some signs in some cases that the services actually look like they may be running in the container, although most of the time they're not. And maybe that's a direction Microsoft will take. I'm not sure. We're going to have to wait and see. But certainly services are an area which are of concern in a WVD environment for sure. Okay, so I did run some tests. I took 25 applications and packaged them up in MSIX and just ran a PowerShell script to be able to published as just a standard MSIX package. It takes a while. You're talking about something that is really a full install. The thing has to get decompressed and put onto your box, and then all the integrations happen. And for the set of apps that I picked there, I was averaging a little under 19 seconds per package to be able to do that. And so when everyone talks about how app attach is just so much faster, you can see the numbers there on the right, 2.63 seconds per package. And that's largely because we're not copying a whole bunch of stuff down. We're simply mounting and then making things available. And so there is a lot less work to do, and that happens much, much faster. But even though it's much faster, I show you the same numbers, those same 25 applications using AppV and doing a same type of PowerShell against an AppV system with the client set in shared content store mode, because that's really the closest to what we're doing in app attach. And we see those numbers were at 1.17 seconds. So, less than half of the time it took for the app attach. And that looks to me like a concern. Although app attach is way faster than having these things manually installed fully the way we would have last year, having app attach with a number like that worries me. I remember as we went from AppV4 to AppV5, the outcry from all of the customers about how slow publishing time was for AppV and AppV5. Well, the numbers you're seeing there are the AppV5 numbers, right? So if you think about something going from 1 second to 1.2 seconds per package, now you're going from that to double that into app attach. I think you're going to be a little bit disappointed in that publishing time there as well. And I think Microsoft has to do some work to help make that happen. As I said, they are doing this MFS, which is going to help a little bit, but I think this next slide will help you understand why that's probably not going to be able to do too much to help us when we're talking about the single user scenario here. See if we can get to that slide. This is a breakdown of where that time is spent during the app attach. So the VHD mounting is this 9% number here. And so if you think about SimFS and it's going to do, read only instead of read, maybe I can get that down in half of that, but that's still not a whole lot of time here. That 1% is a junction point, which quite frankly, I think can go away. I think they just structured that wrong, but I'm not worried about 1%. This 32% here really represents the part of that installation, which is really the integration into the user's environment. So this is where the shortcut is actually getting put in place, and all of the other integrations that have to happen. There isn't much anything that Microsoft is going to be able to do to reduce that number. In fact, that number will probably get bigger over time as MSIX gets more support for more features. That's an area that actually has to expand rather than shrink. It's that 58%, which is dealing with the PowerShell package manager, that I think Microsoft can attack, and that they're going to have to attack to bring that number down significantly to get the publishing times into the range that we're going to want to see. Additionally, I also looked at runtime. So after the install, you want to run the application. What type of overhead is there? And there's really no perfect test for this, but this is a test that I put together to take a look at that. And we're used to AppV having a little bit of overhead, especially with that launch time. Once the application is launched, overhead in AppV is usually negligible. And there are a couple of apps that do weird things in the registry that slow it down. But usually it's that launch time that we're most concerned with. And this test is mostly dominated by the launch time in the results that we see here. So we see AppV adding quite a bit. And the MSIX tests with those same apps actually showed less overhead than with AppV. So I'm very encouraged with this. And so as we start thinking about multi-user and trying to get more VMs on a given piece of hardware, those are things that these numbers look very encouraging for. So finally, I want to talk about the focus coming up for the following year. So those are the numbers from the report. And what do I expect to see going forward? And I can break it down into the two things you see on the slide here. In 2020, for me, it was all about getting more compatibility. So I spent a lot of time writing code and testing for the package support framework and some of my tooling to be able to get us more apps into the umbrella. In 2021, that's probably going to change for at least for the first half of the year, and then we'll reevaluate. And my focus is really going to be about making this easier to use. So one of the things that I've learned through talking with customers and training them on how to do this work is that they're very surprised at how hard it is. It's harder to package up in MSIX today than it is to do AppV packaging and it is to do MSI packaging. It is harder. You need more experience. There is more work to do. There's a lot of debugging involved, and it just takes more time. And we've got to make this easier to do. And so I think there's a lot of work that we can do to be very successful in doing that. And that's going to be where my focus goes for at least the first part of this year. So what does that mean in terms of a prediction for year 4? Predictions are always an awful thing to do. But my guess is it ends up looking a little bit more like this. We're going to pause on the work of trying to get more compatibility out of the package support framework and instead let Microsoft do their bit about getting us better support within the operating system itself. And instead, we're going to focus on this improving our ability to easily package up what does work, because I think that's a better part of the focus. And this is the way I sort of explain this. Now, yeah, this is a graph. You're going to see some curves on here. There's nothing scientific about this. This is just Tim drawing on a piece of paper to come up with these. But if we look at how much time and effort it takes to package up an application in MSI, I draw the curve that kind of like this, right? There's some apps that are really easy, but you need a good amount of work of doing things like the package cleanup through that process to be able to do an effective job. And that takes time and effort to do that. As I compare that to AppV, this is the way I draw this under AppV. And I've gotten some good feedback on this, by the way. This isn't just my idea. I've heard from others that agree with the way I've displayed this out. AppV actually ends up looking a little more like this. It takes less time and effort to package up under AppV than it does in MSI in most cases. There are some apps that are the harder ones out at that far end where, that's different, right? But for the bulk of the apps, it's usually less time and less effort to do that under AppV. And the other piece that doesn't really show on the graph here is that MSI number there is a MSI packager who probably has about 5 years experience to get to that point. In the case of AppV, that's generally someone with about 1 year's experience. So they get there faster as well. How would I draw this with MSIX? Ooh, this is ugly. Okay. To me, it looks a little bit like this. There are these set of applications that are really easy. It's the Microsoft demo. Click, 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 install, click, click, click. I got a package. I'm done, right? It's just like AppV. But once you get past those first set that just really work well, then you've got some work to do. And that takes some time. And that means doing some debugging and pulling out procmon and running traces and trying to analyze what's going on and then mapping that back into what I have to do to fix up. And so that's where we get this bubble in the middle. And my focus this year has been taking some things out of that big spike on the right that we can't do and getting them into that bubble and making that bubble bigger. Next year, what I want to do is, rather than work on taking more of those things, is I want to get that bubble. Where's my laser? Okay. I want to get this bubble here, and I want to bring that over to here. So let's make it easier to get the apps that can get done, right? Spend some effort on that and try to get this curve looking a little bit more like the app V curve. And then once we've done that work, we've made it easier, then we can go back and take a look at these apps we're having trouble with. And hopefully Microsoft will have brought more of those into the fold, but we can start focusing on what other things that we can do to make those applications compatible. So that's the way I look at this going forward here in the near term future. All right, so that's really what I had for you today. Let's see, are there any new questions I've missed yet? It looks like I don't see any there. I'm happy to take any other questions, Jen.
Yeah, I don't see any more either. This was tremendous amount of information. Thank you so much. I learned so much. The whole lower level was not even a thought in my mind. So I can't thank you enough. I think everyone learned a lot today. So,
okay. I'll just say, you know, as a plug, folks that want to learn more, we do have these wonderful online training classes where they can learn all sorts of things.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you can feel free to post it in the chat. There's a lot of thank yous coming in, and we are going to switch gears real quick and let Travis tell us about the AZ140 and his new class.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm presenting. Do I have to do something? Let's see.
Share content. You should just be able to hit the share content.
You know, I think. Sorry about that.
It's the icon right next to your microphone.
Let me try this. You guys see the PowerPoint?
Yes, I do.
Good. Perfect. Okay, so I was pretty surprised when this was announced. I saw a tweet.
Hang on one second. Tim, maybe you want to go off a camera, as it's only showing half a screen for me. Thank you. Perfect. Keep going.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. So I saw a tweet a few weeks ago, it seemed like, where there was a comment about it. But yeah, this came out last week. It's a new specialty certification. And there are a couple things I have listed on here. Exam Exam AZ140, configuring and operating Windows Virtual Desktop on Microsoft Azure. Don't get it confused with AZ104, which is the Azure Administrator exam, or the AZ140 Arizona Form 140, which is Arizona's personal income tax booklet. I did not see anything on Arizona tax law in the exam requirements. So if you Google AZ140, you'll know what I mean. So passing the exam will give you the Windows Virtual Desktop Specialty Certification. And then we can just dive in. I thought I'd cover some of the skills being measured just to get an idea. And this is all available on the Microsoft website. But the first is plan and deploy Windows Virtual Desktop architecture. That includes things like designing a Windows Virtual Desktop architecture, and then user identities and profiles. So coming up with that design on how to deploy, which is always a good thing before you actually go on to the next step, which is implementing Windows Virtual Desktop. So that includes things like managing networking, and I saw in there was like Azure AD, Windows AD, or Azure AD domain services. You know, what different options there are with that. Implementing and managing storage for Windows Virtual Desktop. And then it goes into creating host pools and managed image solutions for that. And that's the biggest one at 25 to 30%. After that is securing Windows Virtual Desktop. And I did see in there things like conditional access policies. And then managing the user environment, as you can expect, there's a lot on FS Logics, managing that, configuring user experience settings. So think it was here or another one coming up. It was around performance, measuring performance, and then installing and configuring apps on the session host. And one thing that kind of stood out on this is the Microsoft documentation does say that this is it will include popular used preview items. So I thought Microsoft exams didn't test on preview items, but that is included. So that's something to be aware of. And then after that is here's monitoring and maintaining the environment. So business continuity and disaster recovery, automating virtual managed desktop tasks. So there's some stuff around templates in there, and then monitoring and managing the health. So that's a high level. This is a beta exam. It comes out on March of 2021. You can't sign up for it yet. And hopefully we'll get more information as that gets closer. With my course, I am trying to align updates better with this. I don't think I have all these objectives covered, maybe 80% right now. I'm working on a MSIX app attach module right now, which is really interesting. That's going to be a big one. So that should be coming within the next month or so. And then additional updates. Again, I'll be able to align those better.
Thank you, Travis. That's
You're welcome.
All good information, so
yeah.
we can get ready.
Yeah, I'll post a link to my course here in the chat and with a discount. So if anybody hasn't signed up for it, you can go ahead and do that.